Why is searching for information across an organization so much harder than it seems?
Information lives in a lot of places. There's different tools that we use. There's different points in time when conversations are had about certain things. And oftentimes, information isn't defined discreetly as part of the process. And so, what I mean by that is you might be having a conversation with someone in a threads format with responses. A decision might be made, but it's not necessarily wrapped up and like highlighted. This is the decision that was made. And so oftentimes someone has to go back and read between the lines, try to pick up on context. So finding the nuggets of information that are the absolute truths can be really hard. This is especially true when we're talking about content that's outside of very specific process or policy documents that are generally speaking pretty clear. We're talking about the harder to find things that are between the lines, that happen in sidebars, but can be important.
A byproduct of organizations in general, I think it is a natural byproduct, is this idea of tribal knowledge, which is a terrible trap to get into, but it just happens. Like it happens where somebody joins an organization, it's like, oh, go talk to Jane. Jane knows about that. And then you're like, okay, great. Where's the documentation? And it's like, well, in 1992, when we did this, and it's just this like long history of all these things, and there's a lack of documentation. And so it gets really hard when you get all these pockets of tribal knowledge. And that creates a huge issue for onboarding, for searching, for connecting teams through a centralized database of information. Now, you might have a lot of different platforms where information can live, but the fact that it lives somewhere is a good starting point. When there isn't a starting point, when there isn't any documentation, that's a huge issue in itself. So I think that can be one of the that's outside of levels because we rigorously document everything, but that is very much a trap that happens. That is a reason why when people join organizations, there can be a gap.
The information is knowledge thing, where you get people who hold on to tribal knowledge in organizations, is often used as like a power tool where like someone has all the information and knows how this system works because it's so complex that it can't even be documented. So go talk to Jane because she's the one who knows it. And so you're new here, she'll give you some treats of information, but you'll never have the full picture that she does. And that's an organizational failure. There's power dynamics and games going on when information is used or hoarded and used as like a weapon instead of as something that's available, democratized, searchable, transparent, and clear. Oftentimes, with that tribal knowledge, when someone's holding on to information, they think it's more complex than it really is. And if you actually take the time to document it and explain what's going on, two things. One, you'll either find out that it's actually simpler than it seems, or two, you'll find out it's way too complicated and needs to be simplified. People should have the information they need to do their jobs without being blocked or obstructed or slowed down. And so the reason for all of this is just context awareness and back to autonomy, letting people have the information they need to do their jobs. And that might be small things, it might be bigger decisions or concepts, but making sure that they know their way around and know how to find information makes them self sufficient, teaches them how to fish, and then they can go about their day and do what they need to. So you need the systems in place, but you also need the content in place.
There are there are like three parts that play into this idea of searching for information. So it's like you teach somebody that the information is important. We have lots of it. That's into documentation. You teach somebody how to search for it and where to search for it and why to search for it in certain places. But then the last is the teaching how to fish, which is what you said, where it's like you give people the lens that we care so much about it. And now it's your responsibility to keep that moving forward. And the next person that you interact with who comes on board, help them get ramped up, right? Help them understand the same thing. So everyone is carrying this forward because I think if the weight of searching for information and documenting falls on one person's shoulders, then it's back to this idea of like tribal knowledge where it's like, well, Miz is the one who tells everybody that that documenting things and searching for them is important. So go to Miz. And it's like, well, that's the failure mode.
As a distributed async company, we've heard this over and over again. Everything's documented, all the calls are recorded. There are no meetings that happen where you had to be there to catch that bit of information or you weren't in the room. Literally every meeting is recorded with a summary of notes that are posted, and every conversation that's had is almost always in text format or Loom format. So the content is there. It's our job to make it accessible and searchable, but it does exist in the records versus trying to recall a conversation that happened in a meeting room 3 weeks ago when you and Billy were walking past the water cooler and then overheard something. Like that doesn't exist in our culture.
There's probably a Notion doc, there's probably some video, there's probably some podcast, there's probably some article. There could be something somewhere or anywhere about a topic. And so the lens, and this gets back to onboarding, is to teach people that the first place you should go is search platforms, likely search Notion. Granted, search can be very challenging because the way things are indexed is different on every platform. This gets back to the idea of tooling. But if you can't find it there and you can't find it in threads and you've searched those two platforms, then it's entirely okay to ask someone. And it is always okay to ask someone. But those two starting points, there's probably some piece of information to answer your question. So it can become very self serve.
Questions are how people learn, and we make ourselves available through the onboarding process to make sure that we're there to answer questions. Questions are okay, they're healthy, they create communication, they build relationships, and oftentimes the answer is documented, and it's just a matter of showing someone how to get to that point. We don't work in silos, we don't work in isolation. It's not like you just plug into the matrix, do your job on your own, and leave. We interact with one another, and normal communication is part of that. And so, uh, we encourage that in a few different ways. We try upfront, answer, and direct as much as possible through an onboarding project. If there's FAQs, it's really helpful to have an FAQ doc and just empower someone with all the information they might ask upfront. We get these questions over and over again, whether it's from candidates or new hires or a partner we're working with. FAQ docs are really helpful. And then there's also just a matter of making people available, an onboarding buddy, a partner as you go through a different project for the first time to kind of give you pointers on the best way to do things. Be available if you have those quick questions. And so creating a system where that is allowed and encouraged leads to better outcomes for everyone and better output. When people ask for information that already exists in documentation and they're asking either one out of laziness, two, they couldn't find it, and I'm speaking kind of generally, it's okay to respond with a link to the documentation specifically. So if someone says, hey, what's our policy on returns? Say, hey, here's our return policy. You can find it
Mhm.
linked here. And that just promotes a culture of finding the thing, providing links to it, and though you should search before asking, it's impossible to find everything. And so this is just a way to point people in the right direction and shouldn't be taken with offense. If someone
Mhm.
responds to a question with a link because the answer already exists, then that's an effective use of everyone's time.
The key with search too is if a person can't find a document quickly, like no one should spend more than 3 minutes at most searching across threads and Notion. If you can't find it, that's a good time to ask.
Yeah, something's broken.
If you can't find it and you ask someone and they say it doesn't exist, create it and it's there.
It's not just about pulling information, it's about contributing back to the system as well. And the owner is everyone. We're all in this. There's no lead documentarian that's just kind of like managing all the docs. Anyone who comes across anything is part of that system. And they have an obligation to contribute to it, improve it, and just keep an eye open for it.
Yeah, and that's the on to your point of it's our job to teach people how to search for it. I think it's one step deeper of our job is to also increase the probability of discovery. So what does that mean? It means in Notion, creating links to links to links of documents, like linking a document in multiple places is not a bad thing at all. It's actually an incredibly good thing because it allows people to like self-serve. You can find your own documents or find your own answers pretty easily. Same thing with we've started linking threads of conversation. So let's use a cultural video, right? There will be like a thread about one of the cultural videos that we do. that is linked in a document so that somebody can go, oh, I need the context for whatever it was, maybe a decision that was made or more feedback. Um, it's always creating the conditions for people to be able to discover the information once we've shown them where to search and how to search for it.
Yeah, so it starts with what are you looking for? That's where I always start. And so understanding whether it's like a memo or a strategy doc, a process doc specific to a team, or if it's just like general company information specific to like mission and values or a handbook or any people policies. So just knowing that is a good place to start. You still have to do work to find what you're looking for, but the faster we can make that by organizing things and grouping them in the right place and using good naming conventions, the better off we'll be.